Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome back.
Good morning.
So today's topic is about the word Torah, based on what we're going to read in this week's Parshat Shavua and Parshat Mishpatim. In general, if someone asks you, what does the word Torah mean? In regular, we call it Hebrewish, in our jargon, if someone says he's learning Torah, what does that word refer to usually? Does someone tell me? We use the word Torah a lot, right? So when we say the word Torah, what are we referring to?
Law.
No, law is like halakha, isn't it? Not all law is called Torah.
Learning.
The general topic of Jewish atmosphere is Torah.
Yeah. So is Daf Yomi considered learning Torah?
Absolutely.
For sure. In fact, in the yeshiva world, if you're learning Chumash, it's Bittul Torah, isn't it? Pretty much. Because real Torah, they call it Torah Shabbat, whatever it is, but
Torah can be processed too.
yeah, Torah is like learning. What we do in yeshiva, you learn Torah pretty much.
Zos Torah.
So what?
Zot Torah Ta'olav. That's the procedure.
Oh, no, that's in here. I'm saying that
Procedure.
no one uses that word nowadays. So when we say the word Torah in our jargon, we're referring to the whole gambit of Jewish law, of Jewish learning, like the Talmud, etc. But in Chumash, what does the word Torah mean? Now, something we said in Shul today, when they did Hagbah, what does everyone say together when we do Hagbah? We say V'zot Torah asher sam Moshe. Remember that? Now, what a lot of people think is that when we do Hagbah, that's what Moshe Rabbeinu got at Har Sinai on Shavuos night. Did anyone ever learn that growing up? That when you do Hagbah and you lift up the Torah, those 5 books of Moses, all written in those letters and on that one giant scroll, that's what Moshe got on Har Sinai Shavuos night. Anyone ever learned that?
Yes.
About that, yeah. There's not one source for that. Not at all. Even though everyone seems to say that, there's no source for that at all. In fact, it doesn't make any sense because. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that God didn't give the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu. I'm saying the Torah that when we say V'zot Torah, according to Chumash, was given to Moshe in the 40th year. We'll get there later. But I want to talk about what the word Torah means in Chumash itself. Now, did we have that word anywhere in Sefer Breshit? Anyone familiar?
No.
Say that louder.
What?
Was the word Torah ever mentioned, used in Sefer Breshit?
It's talking about Bereshit.
No.
In the book, the truth is there's one small mention of the word Torah in Sefer Breshit in Parshat Toldot, when God tells Yitzhak not to go down to Egypt and compares him to his father. He says, Ekev asher shama Avram b'koli, vayishmor mishmarti mitzvotai chukotai v'toratai. But there's a big argument what that's referring to. But Toratai in Pshat doesn't mean the Torah, but it means my instructions. What instructions referring to? Every parsha says something different. Of course, in Chazal they say Torah shebichtav and Torah shebapeh. That's the source that the Avot kept all the mitzvot. But in Pshat, in Sefer Breshit, we don't have the word Torah, which makes sense because it wasn't given yet. In Sefer Shmot, where's the first time we have the word Torah? Anyone know? In Sefer Shmot. Well, the main time is in this week's parsha. We'll read soon. There was one time earlier in with the laws of Pesach. Let me just show you real fast. We're definitely not referring to the entire Torah. In the end of chapter 12, we had a little law about Zot Chukat Pesach. Remember, there's laws for the Pesach. But after we leave Egypt, there's a little summary about how to eat Pesach. And then it says, if there's a stranger in your midst and he wants to do Pesach, he has to do Brit Milah first. And then we're told, Torah achat yeh le'ezrach v'lager gar b'tochachem. That means the same procedure of bringing the Korban Pesach, about what? Eating it, they have to do Milah, and you can't break any bones on it, and you have to eat it in one house, etc. Right? those laws and how you bring the Korban Pesach applies the same for a citizen and for a stranger, even though the strangers didn't come out of Egypt. Once they convert, we have the same law applies to them. But here the word Torah doesn't mean the classic meaning of the word Torah. Now let's go to our topic today. The main time we have the word Torah is in Parshat Mishpatim, and in Perek Havdalah there are two parshiot. There's the first 11 psukim when Am Yisrael says Nasa v'nishma, and this whole section. Remember, good old 24/7. Moshe reads Sefer Abrit and reads it out loud, and everyone says Nasa v'nishma. But there's a kiddush. Remember, there's the Olot and Shlamim, and there's the ceremony. Moshe, Nadav, and Avihu go up the mountain. They bow down, and everyone gets blood sprinkled upon them. Remember, Moshe takes the blood and sprinkles it on the people. But that's a ceremony that, according to Chazal, happened before the Ten Commandments. According to Chumash, and according to Ramban, it happens after. But that's a ceremony where we accept the Brit. But the word Torah is not mentioned there. Here we have it right here. In the second Parsha in Perek Chavdalad, at the end of Parshat Mishpatim, after we hear the Ten Commandments, and after we have the ceremony, after we say Nasa v'nishma, and after we hear Parshat Mishpatim and everything, God tells Moshe the following. God tells Moshe to come up the mountain and be there, and he'll give them the Luchot Even and the Torah and the Mitzvah. We're going to read this carefully in a minute. Moshe goes up, remember, and Moshe's up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. In the meantime, Moshe goes up the mountain, and back at the camp, we have this famous story of Chet HaEgel. Now I'm going to move now to a regular Chumash, English Hebrew with bigger letters, and we'll pick up this story from here. We're going to read and try to understand this. Here we have the word Torah for the first time in this context. V'yomer Hashem el Moshe, Alei elai hara, come up the mountain. Ve'yesham, don't come there just for a while. He didn't say how long, but for a while. For what reason? Ve'na lecha luchot ha'even. Of it, we know what those are. That's luchot habrit. V'ha Torah, v'ha mitzvah, asher katabti lahorotam. Now, we know what Luchot Even are, correct? But what's the Torah that he's going up to get? So what's the best candidate? What we call Torah. Understand? Like, at the simplest meaning, the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu receives on Har Sinai is right here. Because Moshe goes up after the Ten Commandments, and after we say Nasa v'nishma, and after Parshat Mishpatim, he goes up to get a lot more laws. He goes up for the first 40 days, where he's going to get the Luchot Even with the Ten Commandments written in stone, and the Torah and the Mitzvah. Now, if the Torah is what we call the Torah, then what's the Mitzvah? No, this pasuk is pretty confusing now, isn't it? What's my proof is confusing? Every parshan will say something else. But tell me what's problematic with this pasuk. Someone tell me, what's the problem in this pasuk? God says, I'm going to give you Luchot Even, and the Torah, and the Mitzvah, Asher Katabti Lahorotam, which I'm writing to teach them, for you to teach them. How does that limit what Moshe is receiving?
Yeah, it's just what has happened until then. It's not the future Torah.
What's Asher Katabti referring to? Who's writing this? That's what God's writing. What did God write?
Nothing.
He wrote only the Ten Commandments.
Only the Ten Commandments. So some parsha are going to say the Luchot Even, which include the Torah and the Mitzvah, which God wrote to teach them. And then I have to say which of the Ten Commandments is called Torah and which is called Mitzvah. But then why is Moshe up there for 40 days just to get 10 Commandments?
Don't we say
It's
that?
really strange.
It's the oral Torah that he gets the rest of the 40.
So Chazal say is that the Torah Shebiktav and Torah Shabbat. Torah is the Torah Shebiktav and it says Torah Shabbat. But then Asher Katavti, how can it be Torah Shabbat if God wrote it? Even when we say Moshe received it, but God didn't write the Mishnah and the Gemara for sure. Okay, this pasuk is really complicated. Agreed? Yeah. Question?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Well, can't it be that Aseret HaDibrot are the Torah and everything else Moshe had to remember because God told him.
It could be, but so this is referring to only the what?
Sarah the Debrot.
Only the Dibrot, which include the
Right.
Torah and the Mitzvah.
Because that was written down.
Okay.
And Hashem said, I'm going to give you what is written. So what's written?
And everything else he had to memorize for 40 days
Sure.
when he came down. Okay, good.
Otherwise, why was he up there?
Right. No, that's
Anyway,
that's a big question. What's the up there for so long? Because in the meantime, we have Chet Egel. So Moshe goes up. I don't want to get to the Chet Egel story, but he's there for 40 days and 40 nights. And when he comes down, he breaks the Luchot. Now, I'm just going to share with you now a minute and see how they deal with this Asher Katapti problem. Then I'm explaining here on the Psukim, and then we'll see the Parshim inside. A lot of Parshim are going to say that Luchot Even is Asher Katafti, got it? And HaTorah Mitzvah Lohorotam. You understand? They're going to read like this. They're going to say, I'll give you Luchot Even, which I'm writing, Asher Katafti, and the Torah and the Mitzvah, which I'm telling you about Peh, for you to teach them, and you have to write that down. That's one way to get around the pasuk. We'll see that in the Parshanim. Now, let me stop this share and open up a page that has all the Parshanim on it. And then we'll give here, let's do this one here. Rashi says like this. Everyone have it? I made him nice and big. Luchot Even v'Torah v'Mitzvah asher katafti b'tocham. See what he says? He has the word b'tocham here. There's the Luchot Even and the Torah and the Mitzvah, which I wrote inside the Luchot Even. Okay? And so what's Lohorotam mean? He says like this, Kol Sheshmot, all Taryag Mitzvot are applications of the Ten Commandments. See what he's saying? Lohorotam is referring to the Torah that you have to teach them. So, but what the way Rashi understands the pasuk is that this is referring to the Ten Commandments only, but the Ten Commandments include within them all the 613, because the 613 are applications of the 10. Okay, is that pshat? I'm not sure, but that's how he solves the problem with it. How it's everything, but only the 10. He says all the 10 really include all 613. Okay, and then he quotes Rav Sadi, who says that all the warnings that Moshe taught afterwards are based on all the laws come afterwards are based on every dibur in the what do you call it of the Ten Commandments of the Aseret Dibrot. It's basically the same idea. Now, watch how Eben Ezra deals with the question. Okay, but Torah v'Mitzvah. Yesh omrim Torah shbichtav v'Mitzvah Torah Mishnah Shabbat. That's you probably learned that, right? Torah shbichtav to get everything on Har Sinai. But Eben Ezra quotes that to disagree. Okay, v'nachon ki ala luchot levadam yidaber. It's only talking about the luchot, and what's his proof? Asher katafti. Not that. Eben Ezra is just reading the pasuk like it says. Asher katav, God wrote it. Okay? Hashem lo katav Torah, rak Moshe katva al pi Hashem. So the Torah that we have is not written by Moshe Rabbeinu. So this Torah mitzvah can't be referring to the Torah shebichtav and Torah Shabbat Peh. Okay. V'yesh omrim shetam haTorah ala dibur anochi v'mitzvah otisha. But the Torah is the opening statement of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and the mitzvah are the rest of the commandments. The first one is the statement, and the next 9 are commandments. Okay, that's how they solve it. But it's all but there. Bachrim Michat Torah are the loving. There's 12 times it says no. I call that the low point of the Dibrot, not low L-O-W, but L-O Lamed Vav, Lamed Aleph. The word low is like all over the 10, like it says 12 times not to do something in the 10 commandments, in the 10 statements. And there's 6 assays. But he says the loving, the Torah are the things you can't do. And the mitzvah is the mitzvot asay. Zachor, Shem Shabbat, and Kabed Tevicha. Okay? So, he brings up, Eben Ezra brings up all the different opinions about how the Torah and the mitzvah must be referring to something within the Aseret Dibrot, because Asher Katafti. Okay? And then he says, Lufi Dati, he says, Ki HaTorah v'ha-mitzvah shtehem yoru v'yadrichu b'derech yishara. Okay, he says the Torah and the mitzvah are applications of how to act based on these 10. It's almost sort of idea, something like Rashi was saying. He's saying the Torah and the mitzvah sort of go together, and they're basically telling you how to live your day-to-day life. What's the right way to go? He's building on Vasita Yashar Beni Hashem. Later we'll see in Sefer Dvarim. So he says, I wrote the 10 Commandments for you to teach them the Torah and the Mitzvah. He says, like, these are the principles, and then how the rest of the Torah will be the application of it. Okay, and then that's his first pirush. In the second pirush Ibn Ezra, he says what we said before. Asher katafti is going on luchot even, and not on the Torah and the Mitzvah. Ki Hashem lo katav rak aser dibrot. Now he's getting a little more polished on his pirush here. He's saying luchot even asher katafti, and the Torah and the Mitzvah, which I'm going to tell you. Okay, upirush haTorah shebichtav. Okay, va mitzvah Torah sheba'peh. Okay. He's going to quote. We're going to get the psukim in Dvarim later on. Okay, that's one opinion. He says like he mentioned in his first pirush. So he brings one pirush. He brings the Gaon. He brings Rav Sadia. Rav Sadia brings down that it's, what do you call it? Asher Katati is only on the Luchot, and the Torah and the Mitzvah are the rest of the laws. Torah Shebitav and Torah Sheba'peh, and he disagrees as usual. He says, in his opinion, it's all talking about the Dibrot, and the Torah is the first two Dibrot, and the Mitzvah is the last day. Okay. I brought all those simply to champion the Ramban. Ramban is going to go in a totally different direction, and Ramban, because he's all-encompassing, is going to take the story in Sefer Dvarim to understand what's happening in Shemot. Ramban's going to do this several times. Remember, the 10 Commandments, we have them in Sefer Shemot, and we have the same story in Sefer Dvarim about how we get the 10 Commandments. Ramban's commentary on Sefer Shemot is going to be rooted and basically founded in his understanding of what's happening in Sefer Dvarim. In other words, Ramban is going to read Sefer Dvarim together with Sefer Shemot, and he's going to explain Sefer Shemot in light of Sefer Dvarim. He'll do it several times in his commentaries on Har Sinai. And I think that approach of Ramban is much more comprehensive because he's not just taking what's written in Sefer Shemot, he's reading the entire Chumash, and based on what happens later on in Chumash, he's going to go back and read what's happening in Sefer Shemot. So this is what Ramban says, and then the rest of this year will be simply to explain the Ramban. Okay. God says, V'yeshem, I'll give you Luchot Even, Shitakev alahar. Stay on the mountain until I give you the Luchot Even, the Torah and the Mitzvah. He says, Asher katafti yachzor halaluchot. He's going to say, like the Gaon said, right? Asher katafti is only referring to the 10 Commandments. And the Horotam is going on the Torah and the Mitzvah. V'shura katuv, how do you explain the pasuk? I'm going to give you Luchot Even that I wrote, got it? And the Torah and the Mitzvah that you have to teach them. Now, how does he get that? He quotes the psukim in Dvarim. Then he quotes, I'm going to go there in a minute. We're going to read the psukim in Dvarim, what he's referring to. Then he quotes Ibn Ezra to disagree. Ibn Ezra says the Torah is the first two Dibrot, the Mitzvah is the last day. And he says it doesn't make sense because of what's written in Dvarim. In Dvarim, we can prove everything, as he says. He brings something, what do you call it? There's a remez that the Ramban likes to bring more Kabbalistic interpretations. So he says that Rabbeinu, and also in Midrash Rabbah and Dvarim, Yitachein, that this is a hint to what? That the entire Torah was written before creation. Okay, now that's a Kabbalistic idea that the Torah predated creation. But that's again Kabbalistic and not Pshat. But he says the Kabbalistic interpretation is based on this problem in the Pshat. Rashbam says Asher Katapti, going back on the Luchot, like everyone else said before. Rashbam is very much like Ramban. We'll go back to Ramban in a minute. Just real quick, the Sforno says something really interesting. He says the Torah is the intellectual, what do you call it? Philosophical understanding, and the mitzvah, the actual commandments. Now he says Asher Katafti, it's going on both. How does he solve the problem? Remember, the biggest problem is Asher Katafti. All the Parshim are dealing with what's Asher Katafti referring to? Just the 10 or the Torah and the mitzvah? This is what he says. He says that God's original plan, listen to Sforno, it's like mind-boggling. He's saying God's original plan was to write the entire Torah on stone. Like the whole thing on stone, not just the top, that's not just the first 10. The entire Torah, had they not seen with Chet Egel. Okay? And he quotes a pasuk in a midrashic reading about Tam Revot Kodesh. Eish Lama. That's like fire written on fire. So he's saying this is a pasuk in Kitisa. Good. Okay. Okay. He said Moshe only brought down the luchot to break them because they sinned, but God's original plan was to write everything on the luchot. But because they sinned, when he goes up again, he only gets to the first 10 on the luchot, and everything else he has to write down. Isn't that an amazing sforno? I think it's really eye-opening sforno. Okay. Now I want to go back now to, again, I don't think it's the Sforno's promise. I think it's ingenious how he's reading it. He's saying that had it not been for Chet Egel, God would have written the entire Torah, and Moshe simply would have been just to carry it down. No. I want to go back to the Ramban's approach, that he's basing it on what's written in Mishneh Torah. Now, I'm not going to take what Ramban's saying a step farther and try a different understanding of the word Torah. Ramban doesn't say this. Ramban is simply saying, he explains these psukim based on Devarim. I want to take a careful read of what's happening in Devarim, and based on that, try to figure out what the word Torah is. Okay? So that was part 1 of the share. Now comes part 2, which is the main part. And we have to stay awake for this. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share and do a quick summary. What we saw so far was that the word Torah, in its all-encompassing context, we first have when Moshe goes up for the first 40 days, and whatever Torah is referring to, it's definitely something major that Moshe is receiving right after we say Nasa v'Nishma. And when Moshe goes up for the first 40 days, is it just the rest of Chumash? Is it just, part of the Dibrot? Is it Torah Shebiktav and Torah Sheba'al Peh? A massive machloket between the Parshanim, but there's something major going on here. Now we're going to see Sefer Dvarim, the parallel story in Dvarim, and try to understand Shemot and later Dvarim. And we went, and it was alluded to by the Ramban. So I'm going to open up Sefer Dvarim now, and we're going to read the story of the 10 Commandments in Sefer Dvarim. Let me open up a Chumash now. You can follow with the Chumash at home. Now, just a quick review for those who don't remember. Sefer Dvarim has one major speech that Moshe gives from chapter 5 to 26. The first 4 chapters is Moshe Rabbeinu's first speech, explaining to the new generation 40 years later why it's been 40 years since they got the Torah. Remember, the new generation is about to enter Israel, conquer the land and set up the nation and follow the Torah. And Moshe is going to teach the laws to the people one last time before he dies. And before he teaches the laws from chapter 5 to 26, he has to explain to them why it's been 40 years since we got these laws. And the main reason is the story of the sin of the spies. And that's why that's in the first speech. And that's why he begins with that story. And then how God's now ready to go to war with them. That's why he brings the story of of how he conquered Sichon and Og. Basically, he gives them a pep talk speech and introduces the laws. That's the opening speech. The main speech will be in Dvarim, and he's going to tell the people, the laws that I'm giving you now are laws that God gave me 40 years ago. And what's going to make the laws of Dvarim unique, which makes a lot of sense, is that these are laws that were written, but they're given to us by God to keep them and apply them once we conquer the land of Israel and set up a nation. These are laws that apply to establishing a nation in the land of Israel. We received them 40 years ago because we should have gone to Israel right away. But because the sin of the spies, that generation had to die in the desert. Now these laws become practical again and applicable because now you're about to go in the land. So Moshe is going to explain that in his speech. Listen to the first line of his speech. Moshe calls all of Israel together and tells them, and Moshe's speech begins right here with Shema Yisrael. He has to wake them up. And Moshe, again, in case you don't remember, Moshe starts speaking here in chapter 5 and doesn't stop until the end of chapter 26 with Bikurim. 22 chapters of rebuke and law. Now, like in any good speech, say what you're going to say before you start, then say it, and then when you're done, say what you said. We're going to look at the beginning and the end. So Shema Yisrael, what's the speech about? To the chukim and mishpatim. Remember this phrase. Moshe says, listen to these chukim and mishpatim. I'm purposely not translating. It comes chok or statutes and ordinances, but from now on, chukim and mishpatim. Asher onochi dover bosnechem hayom. That I'm telling you today, we'll see in a minute, I'm telling you, but God gave them to me. And these laws require two things. Ulamadetem otam, ushmartem lasotam. These laws are not just laws to keep. These laws have to be studied and hence applied and kept. Jewish law has to be studied. And part of keeping the laws by studying the law, because when you study the law, when laws are written as principles, you study the laws and then you can derive from that study how to apply them to cases that are not written in the law code. So therefore, these laws have to be studied and kept. And Moshe is going to begin the study. But before he teaches the laws, he has to say under what authority is he teaching these laws. And therefore he tells the people, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem our boss, our God, our boss, our covenantal partner, Harati Manu Brit B'chorev. Before Moshe teaches the laws, he tells them, these laws are part of a covenant that you accepted on Har Sinai. Because you're a covenantal partner with God, hence you're obligated to keep these laws I'm teaching you. I'm commanding you under that authority. And don't tell me it wasn't with you, it was with your parents. He says, no, it wasn't only with your parents, the previous generation, that God convened this covenant. No, everyone here today as well. Members, we were all at Sinai. It's a covenant with the entire nation, and therefore, even though you weren't there, you were there. Then he says, if this is a covenant between God and the people, why doesn't God himself speak? So Moshe says, God spoke to you, panim b'fanim. God spoke to you from the fire. But I became the middleman because you guys got scared. Because I was the middleman between God and you at that time to tell you the words of God, because you were afraid of the fire and you didn't go up the mountain, and he'll explain that story in a minute. Then he quotes the 10 statements that he brought that are written in stone. And then he says as follows, after the 10 commandments, 10 statements, these 10 statements you heard directly from God, from the fire, okay? And God wrote them down on the luchot, and he gave them to me. Got it? That's the famous dibrot that Moshe wrote down on the luchot. Now Moshe is going to tell the story about how they got scared. And listen carefully, this is key. When you heard the first 10 statements, you all came to me. I'll just read this quickly. And you told me, we're super impressed about God, how great God is and his glory, etc. And we know God can't talk to man, but what? If any more of this, we're going to die. There's only so much we can handle. We'll be consumed by this fire. We're too close. This encounter with God is too intense. If we continue hearing God speak to us, we're going to die. Because how can anyone mortal, right, hear God speak to them and stay alive? They're saying, Moshe, this is way too much for us. We're simple human beings, too intense. Pasach Gimel, okay? Pravutau Shma, Moshe, you go up and listen. Et kol asher yomar Hashem Eloheinu, everything God tells us. Vat tedaber eleinu et kol asher yidaber Hashem Eloheinu elecha, listen carefully, v'shamanu v'asinu. Meaning what? You go up and get the laws, and everything you say in God's name, Nasa v'nishma. See what they're saying here? They were so impressed by Har Sinai, but scared by Har Sinai, that Moshe Rabbeinu, you know what? You get all the laws, and you tell us what God said. We don't want to encounter, that close encounter is too much for us. But they're willing to say Nasa v'nishma now, not to what they hear from God, but they hear from Moshe in the name of God. So is this a good idea or a bad idea? Moshe tells the people. Remember, Moshe is telling the story 40 years later to the new generation, what happened 40 years earlier. Moshe tells them, God heard your complaint, and God says, thumbs up. Great idea. God told me, Shamati at Kol Divrei Amazah. I heard what the people say. Really good. They should always have this fear in me. God basically gives them a thumbs up. Now, Here's the key to the word Torah. Listen carefully. Lech emor lahem, shuva lechem lo lechem. Go tell the people, go back to your tents. Stay back home. V'ata po amodi madi, Moshe, you stay here with me on Har Sinai. Send the people back home. They don't have to stand in Har Sinai. They can go back to their tents, back to the camp. Moshe, you stay here with me. V'adabra elecha et kol ha-mitzvah. Remember this word? V'chukim v'mishpatim. Asher tilamdeim v'asu ba'aretz asher nochim noten lahem l'rishta. God tells Moshe, you stay here with me on Har Sinai. And I want to claim that's the first 40 days. To receive what? To receive all the commandments and what? The commandment, ha-mitzvah. We'll see what that means in a minute. And the chukim and mishpatim, which you have to teach them that they have to keep in the land that they're going soon to conquer and inherit. Meaning, had it not, this is the first 40 days. Had it not been for Chet HaEgel, there's no reason to stay in the desert. And therefore, Moshe goes up to get a set of laws that Am Yisrael should keep and apply within the next couple of weeks. In other words, Moshe is going to go up to Har Sinai for, we'll see, 40 days. He'll get a set of laws that Am Yisrael needs to keep right away as they go and conquer the land. And when they conquer the land, what will happen? They'll establish a nation, and these laws will help them guide how to establish a nation in the land of Israel. That's why we find laws for a king, and laws for how to go to war, and laws for a judicial system and a Supreme Court. Basically, tons of laws of day-to-day life, especially at the national level. Okay? And then he tells them, make sure to keep these laws that I'm commanding you, okay? And follow the derech which God's commanding you in order to live for a long time in the land and not be thrown out. Now, after this introduction, what I want to find out, remember, God told Moshe Rabbeinu, stay here on the mountain and I'll tell you the mitzvah and chukim and mishpatim, you have to teach them. And look how the next chapter begins, which is Moshe's continuing speech. Moshe is telling the people, V'zot, what's coming up now in my speech, is the ha-mitzvah and the chukim and mishpatim that God commanded me to teach you to keep in the land you're going down to conquer. In order that you fear God and keep his mitzvot and listen to these laws, they're good for you. A beautiful introduction. Then, now the laws are about to start. And the first law is, he reminds them, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem our God, our boss, he's the one and only God. And the most important commandment is your attitude. V'aftat Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha. Now, I want to show you, Havat Hashem is going to be ha-mitzvah. Because all commandments are created equal, but one mitzvah is more equal than others, if you understand my analogy. But in this covenant between God and the people, there's a lot of detailed laws, but the most important instruction, the commandment, with hey idea, a definitive thing, is the love and fear of God. And therefore, the first 4 or 5 chapters, from chapter 6 now to chapter 11, is going to focus on Havat Hashem. And we'll see in a minute, that's going to be the ha-mitzvah. So, but again, what's coming up in the speech, though, is going to be the ha-mitzvah and the chukim and mishpatim. Now, what I want to claim is that ha-mitzvah is ha-mitzvah, which is loving God and fearing God. The chukim and mishpatim is going to be the Torah. I'll try explaining what I mean in a minute. I'm going to make a, anyway, we have the first parsha of Shema, and then a whole bunch of laws about and reminders about doing hayashar b'nei Hashem. The Rabban talked about that before in Ibn Ezra. Okay, to be good, and your kids ask you a question: why do we have to keep all these mishpatim? Tell them we are avadim hayinu, but we say it to Seder, and God took us out for our own good, and He keep these commandments to keep them, and it's the right thing to keep the commandments. These are all introductory laws, and He goes on and on about you're going to come to Israel. God's going to come to Israel when you go there. He'll help you defeat your enemies. Don't make covenants with them. You're an Am Kadosh. This is right out of Har Sinai, right? You're an Am Kadosh, Hashem Elokecha. God chose you from all the nations, not because you're so numerous, because God loves you, and He chose you to serve Him. And you just hear the echoes of the 10 Commandments here. You should know in your heart that God's your God. Helen Aman, Shomer Habrit v'Chesed lo Avav lo Shomer Mitzvotav. Remember, that's the end of statement 2. That's the first 2 commandments, so summarized, expounded upon in his opening speech. Then if you keep my laws, I'll bless you. If you don't keep them, I'll punish you. And he goes about don't be afraid about conquering the nations. Basically, this is what God told them 40 years ago to the new generation. The first generation didn't keep up to this, and then the new generation now gets to hear them. Now, I just want to show you why the first section is called HaMitzvah. Moshe goes on in Parshat Etchanan and Ekev about loving God and fearing God. I'll give you one quick example in chapter 10. And now, Israel, what does God want from you? Right? To fear him, to go in his ways, to love God, to serve him with all your heart, to keep all the mitzvot. That's all God asks for, is basically everything. But it's over and over again is an admonition and I guess encouragement to take the challenge of becoming God's nation. He goes over now, as Moshe gives his speech, he reminds them. He goes on a tangent and reminds them what happened in the meantime in the last 40 years. He says, you need to remember that you're not getting what you deserve because you're an Am Kshei Oref. Remember, you rebelled so many times. And he says, remember what happened at Chorev with the sin of the golden calf. Remember what happened with the Meraglim. As Moshe repeats the laws and guidance that God gave him 40 years ago, in the middle of that, he's going to review and rebuke them based on their 40 years of history, make sure they learn from their mistakes. But the actual laws are 40 years old. The rebuke is based on the history of the last 40 years. Now, this goes on till chapter 11. Remember, because God's bringing you to a land of hills and valleys, the land that we need rain, famous lines. And God's going to watch the land. And then if you follow my laws properly, the second parsha, Kriyat Shema, I'll give you the rain at the right time. If you don't keep my laws, I have to throw you out, etc. So if you want to stay in this land and not be thrown out, you better keep my mitzvot. Now, this is going to end a section, and listen how we define what the mitzvah section was. This is the end of chapter 11 summarizes. I'll show you this on a chart in a minute. Kim shomor et tishmor et kol ha-mitzvah hazot. Again, I want to claim ha-mitzvah in this context is the mitzvah of loving God, and we'll define it now. Again, verse 22. Kim shmor tishmor et kol ha-mitzvah hazot. This is right after the second parsha of Kriyat Shema. Asher nochim etzavetchem lasuta, which is to do what? Lahavat Hashem Elohechem, lelechem b'chol derachav v'tutav kavo. What's the mitzvah? Is loving God, walking in his ways, and clinging to God. If that's your attitude, then God will help you conquer the land. It's not, you're not conquering the land because it belongs to you, it belongs to God. God's taking away from the bad nations for their bad behavior. You only have the right to conquer it if you're keeping my mitzvot. If you don't keep my mitzvot, I'm not going to help you conquer it. If you keep my mitzvot and have the right attitude, then everywhere you go, I'll be there to help you conquer it. And no one will get in your way, and that's the promise. And then talks about the bracha and klala. Now, that's the end of the HaMitzvah section. And now, once God helps you conquer the land, you're crossing the Jordan River to go conquer the land that God's giving you. And once you conquer the land, and as you conquer the land, ushmartem lasot et kol hachukim v'et hamishpatim, keep the chukim mishpatim now. I'm about to teach you. And in chapter 12, guess how it begins? Eila chukim v'mishpatim. And now from chapter 12 to 26 will be laws. So let me just summarize this in a other screen, in a little chart here. Varim speech. Here we go. Where's that? That's not it. Here. We don't want this one. We want this one. Yeah. Moshe Rabbeinu's speech begins with Shema Yisrael Techukim Mishpatim. I'm teaching you today. It ends in chapter 26. We'll get to this at the speech in a minute here. I wanted this one. My mistake. Here we go. Make this smaller. Here's the speech. Sefer Dvarim has two sections. Make this a little smaller here again. And what do we have? We have, after the 10 Commandments, we have the HaMitzvah section. See that? From chapter 6 to 11. Chapter 6 to 11. Beginning with the first parsha of Kriyat Shema, ending with the last parsha of Kriyat Shema. That's why we say them every day. And then we have the transition, and we start the Chukim Mishpatim in chapters 12 through 26. You follow? There's let me do this. That's not good. Here we go. This one, and annotate, and draw. Here we go. This is going to be the Mitzvah section. And this will be the Chukim Mishpatim section from chapter 12 to 26. And the buffer in between will be Hariva. We'll see in a minute. Got that? Now, what I want to claim is when Moshe went up in Parshat Mishpatim, what we bring to receive the Torah and the mitzvah, this is the ha-mitzvah, and the Chukim Mishpatim must be the Torah. And that's what I want to prove to you now. Understand my point? What I want to claim is the laws that Moshe Rabbeinu is receiving. Let me undo this share here for a minute. This is my key point. To understand Sefer Dvarim, remember, Sefer Dvarim is not a review of the first 4 books of Chumash. It's a common misunderstanding. Sefer Dvarim is a set of laws that Am Yisrael needs to repeat over and over again. They require shinun, vishnantam levanecha, but they're the set of laws that Moshe received on the first 40 days. I'm going to repeat that again because it's as simple as can be, but people get confused. Okay? On the first 40 days, Moshe received the main set of laws that Am Yisrael needs to keep to fulfill the goal of Brit Sinai to become a Mamlechet Kohanim B'Goy Kadosh, become a nation representing God. We have a whole set of laws about how we conquer the land and how we have to act to be worthy of conquering the land and what we do once we conquer the land. So we need to set up a judicial system. We have to have a taxation system. We have to have a Supreme Court. We need laws of how we go to war. We need laws for the marketplace. We need these laws to how we take care of the poor and the needy of social justice. We have marriage laws and divorce laws. We have laws of the marketplace. We have laws about our leadership, not just the king, but also the Levim and the Nevim, etc. Who to listen to, not to listen to. We have tons of laws about how to establish a nation representing God in the land of Israel. Laws about Aliyah L'Regel, about the main law will be Hamakom HaSherif Harashem, our national center, in the Mikdash in Yerushalayim. Now, those laws we'll find in Sefer Dvarim. We didn't find them in the earlier books. Okay? Am Yisrael, the first generation, learned them 40 years ago, but never could keep them because of because of the sin of the spies. And now Moshe is teaching them for the last time in Sefer Dvarim to the new generation because they're going to fulfill them. That's Sefer Dvarim in a nutshell. Now we need to show you that this Chukim Mishpatim section, which are the main laws of Chumash that Am Yisrael needs to keep when they come in the land, from chapter 12 to 26, that's going to be the Torah that Moshe receives on the first 40 days. The ha-mitzvah is the attitude. Like in every yeshiva, you have what's called Musar and Machshava, like learning, fearing God, loving God, and then practical laws about what you do in day-to-day life, like we call Shulchan Aruch or Halacha L'Maisa. So chapters, basically, Etchanan and Ekev, for chapters 6 through 11, is how to behave. It begins with Shema, V'ahavta, and ends with Vayim Shemoah. And chapter 12 through 26 is Shulchan Aruch, how to set up a nation. Let me show you two now where are we? And we'll see the laws are going to sort of follow the 10 Commandments as well. Now, what I want to show you, according to Sefer Dvarim, that this whole set of laws is referred to as the Torah. Why? Remember, the speech began in chapter 5 and ends in chapter 26. Let's look at the introduction to chapter 5. Let's open up a Chumash. 1 second. Where are we here? Do a share. I'm going to open my Chumash again and look at remember chapter 5 begins the speech. Let's look at chapter 4, which is the last introductory speech. Good. And Moshe tells the people in the introduction, now listen, Israel, to the Chud Mishpatim that I'm teaching you, okay, in order to be worthy to stay alive and conquer the land that God's giving you. It's a package deal. Don't take off and take on. Don't pick and choose. Look what God did to people who sinned. And you're the survivors. You didn't sin in the desert. You made it here. Keep up the good work. Now, listen to this explanation, which will give our first understanding of what Torah means. Okay? Re'eh, understand, Moshe is saying, I'm teaching you today. I'm teaching you laws that God commanded me to teach you, to keep in the land you're going now to inherit, to conquer and set up a nation. I'm teaching you laws, but they're God's laws. I'm simply the middleman. I'm teaching you. Make sure to keep them. Why? You keep these laws and you have an impact on others, on other countries, on other nations. You have an impact on all God's people. Okay? Because they'll hear that these laws that you're keeping, and they'll say, what this great and wise nation, and Where's the wisdom come from and laws come from? Because we have this special connection to God. God gave us these laws. We keep them. We talk about God. We praise God. And we attribute everything we're doing to God. And God rewards us with prosperity should we keep them, and punishes us when we don't keep them. When the people see that correlation, they'll say, they'll see this nation has such just chukim mishpatim tzadikim. Got it? Moshe is about to give them the Torah, got it? And the Torah is what? It's the chukim mishpatim. Okay. So the name for these just and right and righteous laws are called the Torah. It's the instruction book of how to become a nation representing God. And Torah is a set of laws that has a goal. Like there's a Torah, there's a procedural set of laws of how to bring a mincha, or how to bring an olan shlamim in Sefer Vayikra. That's called a Torah. Zotra Tolah, Zotra Mincha, Zotra Tachatat, etc. So there's a Torah for Korban Pesach. And any procedural law has a set of instructions, Hora'ot. So the instruction booklet of how to become a Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, how to become a nation in the service of God, that's going to be the laws in Sefer Dvarim. Now, then he gives some warnings not to follow other gods, etc. At the end of the chapter, he finishes his speech, and then Chumash tells us as follows. The speech is over. Chumash now is talking, introducing the main speech, and says as follows, V'zot ha-Torah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael. What's coming up now from chapters 5, this is the end of chapter 4. Chapter 4 ends here. We're in chapter 4. Chapter 5 is right after this. What's coming up now in chapter 5 to 26 is the Torah that Moshe taught bnei Yisrael, which includes the warnings and the chukim and mishpatim, which God told Moshe Rabbeinu when they left Egypt 40 years ago. And now in Iver Yarden, 40 years later, the new generation, who's about to conquer the land, is being taught the laws again by Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay? After what? After we began our conquest of the other side of the Jordan, we defeated Sichon and Og. Now we see the God's with us. And now it's time to conquer Eretz Canaan as well. And therefore Moshe says, here, these are laws that we got as we're about to conquer the other side of the Jordan and set up a nation in Eretz Canaan. But this is all introduces Zot HaTorah Asher Sam Moshe Lifnei Bnei Yisrael. Now that's the pasuk we quote when we do Hagbah. We add something to the pasuk from somewhere else with Al Pi Hashem B'Yad Moshe, but that's with the Masaot later on in Maseh. But what's coming up in this speech is the Torah. Now, what's the best proof of them all? When the speech is over in chapter 27, there'll be another commandment Moshe tells the people, right? Keep this commandment, which one? When you cross the Jordan River, right? I want you to make big stones. I want to make a ceremony in Harival. What did we do in Harival? We put up 12 big rocks. I mean, not 12. You can say how many. Put up big stones and plaster them so you can write on them. You're going to write on these stones all the laws I just told you from chapters 5 through 26. In order to be worthy of conquering the land that God's giving you. And when you cross the Jordan River, put these avanim up on Harival and build a mizbech, just like Har Sinai, build an altar for God. Mizbech avanim, built with avanim shlemot, the laws of mishpatim. Bring olot and shlamim, bring olot and shlamim and eat. And then what do you write on the katafta lavanim? Write on the stones at kol divrei haTorah zot veritev. The Torah I just told you from chapter 5 to 26. That's what you write. Let me just show you this on a easier source sheet. This whole setup. Here we go. Where were we? We do not this one. We want. Sorry about that. We want this one here. What do we have? The speech began with V'zot HaTorah Asher Sam Moshe. That's the introduction. Then the main speech, chapter 5 through 26. Got it? And at the end of the speech, Moshe says, write the Divrei Torah that I just told you on stones and write them with good explanations. And then every 7 years, we're going to repeat this gathering, gather the nation every 7 years, Sukkot time at the end of the Shemitah cycle. And what do we do? What do we read at Hakel? the laws of Sefer Dvarim, the words of this Torah. V'zot Torah is referring in Chumash to the laws of Sefer Dvarim, the Moshe gets on the first 40 days. Now, remember this photo that we saw? That he says that God's original plan was to write all the laws in stone and give them to Moshe Rabbeinu. So now in Sefer Dvarim, what's God telling Moshe to do? Am Yisrael is going to write all the laws in stone. In another Mamad Har Sinai. This is just like Parshat Mishpatim, isn't it? We have Olot and Shlamim. Remember in chapter 27? And we gather every 7 years at Hakel and read the Torah again. So we're going to relive Har Sinai of Parshat Mishpatim. Now, who's going to be the leader of the nation? But let me just do this one over here. I'll do that in a minute. Who's going to lead the nation in establishing, the people keeping the laws? That's the job of the king. The king's going to be the CEO in charge of making sure that we become a nation serving God. And that's why in chapter 17 in Devarim, in the laws of a king, we have, what do we have? The king has a special law, right? When we have a king, what's he do? When the king sits on his throne, this laws of Sefer Dvarim, he has to write them down. That's not to fulfill the mitzvah of writing them down, but what? These laws have to be with him. He should read them every day of his life to learn how to fear God and how to lead the nation, to keep all the words of this Torah Zot and all these laws. So he shouldn't become haughty. Basically, the Torah will be the guidebook of how the political leadership has to lead the country, with all the principles and laws coming in Sefer Dvarim. So that's going to explain Dvarim. Just one interesting thing, which supports what's happening in Shemot as well. Had we not sinned with the sin of the golden calf, we would have gone right to Israel. We would not have needed a portable Mishkan, a portable Mikdash. I wouldn't need, because had we not sinned with Chet HaEgel, we would have gone right to Israel and conquered the land within a couple of weeks. And we could have built a permanent temple, which Sefer Dvarim calls HaMakom Asher Yivchar Hashem. Had not been for Chet HaEgel, we would need a temple, but not a portable one. I wouldn't need a portable Mishkan. I could build a permanent temple. And that's what Sefer Dvarim is talking about. It explains why the Mishkan is not mentioned in Sefer Dvarim, but rather it talks about a Mikdash. Remember, HaMakom Asher Yivchar Hashem, and at the Mikdash we bring all of our korbanot. We go there, Ali Al Rega, Shlosh Pamim B'Shana. We bring our Bikurim there, we bring our Bechor there. Over 20 times in this law section, we have laws that relate to HaMakom Asher Yivchar Hashem, the place that God's going to choose, what later becomes Yerushalayim. And that's going to be the center of our worship of God and our rejoicing. It'll be our national center. But the reason why the Dvarim doesn't mention the Mishkan, because had it not been for Chet HaEgel, I wouldn't need a Mishkan. I only need the Mishkan because of Chet HaEgel. But had it not been for Chet HaEgel, I would have had a Mikdash, and things would have been fine. And that explains why the laws in Dvarim don't mention the Mishkan, because these laws reflect the ideal of have we gone to Israel without sitting in the desert. Now, let's go back to, I want to end the shir now and prove this point from a couple other directions. The laws in Dvarim relate to the covenant in Sinai. Remember? Hashem Elokeinu Karatam Banu Brit B'Chorev. That's how Moshe begins his speech. And Mishpatim, that when Moshe goes up for the first 40 days, it's right after we say Nasa v'Nishma and we solidify the Brit. I want to show you the covenantal connection between these laws and Dvarim. Remember in the speech, let's open up a different source sheet now. Remember the speech starts with say what you're going to say what you said. So before we take a look at that, here, just a quick review in Sefer Dvarim. It's not a review of the first 4 books. It's simply not, because most of the first 4 books are not in Dvarim, and most things in Dvarim are not in the first 4 books. Okay, and we'll prove from again. We'll get to these Psukim and Shemot again when Moshe gets it, and we're going to bring the proof from chapter 5 in Dvarim. But I want to show you. Remember, Moshe began the speech with these laws in Dvarim are part of a covenant that you made in Sefer Shemot to become God's people. What was the Brit? What's the Sefer HaBrit? Im Shemot Tishmu B'Koli. We had this last week in Parsha Yitro. Ushmartem et Brit. If you obey me and keep my covenant, Brit Sinai, you'll be my special nation. Even though I'm the God of all the lands, or because I'm the God of all the lands and care about them, I'm making a brit with you, and you'll be for me a mamlechet kohanim, b'goy kadosh. You'll be a nation in the service of God. A kohen represents a God, but not just an individual, but a nation representing God. A nation separated in the service of God. And we agree to that. We get the 10 statements. And now, after we get the Luchot Even, we're going to get a set of laws that applies them to day-to-day life in the land of Israel. So in the main speech, chapter 5, he tells what happened at Har Sinai. Chapter 6 to 11 is the mitzvah section from Shema Tavayim Shemoah. Chapters 12 to 26 is the Chum Shmatim section. And we're going to claim this is HaMitzvah and this is the Torah. And we saw the psukim before that Moshe says the Torah are the Chukim Mishpatim. Now, just for example of how these laws, remember what we saw in what Rab Sadia said, that in Rashi brought down that the laws that Moshe gets on Har Sinai expound upon the Dibrot and apply them. So the first two commandments of first two statements of believing in God and understanding He's your boss and not serving other gods, that pretty much is reflected in Etchana and Erikev in chapter 6 through 11. There's loving God, believing in God, not serving other gods. That's the main topic of chapter 6 through 11 in the speech. In the Chukim Mishpatim section, so in the 10 Commandments, well, don't carry God's name in vain, but that implies you should carry God's name properly. The place that we make God's name known is the Mikdash, HaMakom Asher Yivchar Hashem, the Shakein Shmo Sham. We're going to make God's name known by gathering and talking about God, singing His praises in the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. That's Tehillim and that's Tefillah, and that's talking about God and learning God's laws in Yerushalayim. So the idea of making a name for God is parallel to 3, and that's going to be fulfilled by HaMakom Asher Yivchar Hashem. Then the next is about Shabbat, but in Devarim we have laws that relate to Shabbat. We have the 7-year Shemitah cycle, right? We have the 7 days of all the holidays, 7 days Chag HaMatzot, 7 weeks, and 7 days of Sukkot in the 7th month. But that's going to expound the idea of Shabbat and Kedusha in the realm of time. Then, just like we have honoring parents, keeping tradition going, we have laws of our nation's parents. We have the Shoftim, we have the judges, the Supreme Court, the Kohanim and Levim, the Melech, the Navi. That's parallel to honoring your parents. Then, instead of Lord Tirtzach, we have laws of how we go to war. Sometimes you have to kill. Laws of capital punishment, laws of Arim Miklat, etc. And then the rest of the laws are about Lo Tignov, and applying basically the second half of the Dibro is one big law about building a just society. That's going to be the main part in second half of Shoftim in Parsha Ki Tetzei, the beginning of Ki Tavo. And then now I want to read the end of the speech where Moshe is summarizing this idea of covenant. We just had all these laws. So Moshe said in the beginning, listen to all these laws I'm teaching you today, learn them and keep them. He talks about we made a brit in Sinai. We have all the laws that apply to 10 Commandments in day-to-day life in Israel. And now look at the grand finale, how it reflects Mount Sinai. Just remember what we said in Mount Sinai. The brit at Sinai was, Im Shemot Yishmo, are you going to obey me? Be my covenant partner. You be my skula, like treasure nation from all the nations. You be a mamlechet kohanim and goy kadosh. Listen how Moshe ends the speech. Right? This day of the speech, remember since chapter 5, remember Hayom is the day of the speech. We say in Shema. Right? This day, even though Moshe is teaching the laws, Moshe is saying this day, these are God's laws. Hashem Elokecha, Hashem Echad. Hashem, your God, He's commanding you these laws. I'm just telling you them. He's commanded you to keep the Chukim Mishpatim and keep them with the attitude of the mitzvah section. That's the 2 parts. This is chapters 12 to 26, and keeping them with the right attitude. That's chapters 6 through 11. Okay. Now we have the exchange of commitment between Am Yisrael and God. What did we take upon ourselves? This is Anu Mamirecha V'Atam Amirenu. We say in that piyut on Yom Kippur. What did we take upon ourselves? Et Hashem Amart Hayom. He'll be our God. That's Brit Milah. That's the 4th cup at the Seder. That's why God took us out of Egypt. L'lecha b'drachav. That's doing tzedek u'mishpat. As explained all through Devarim. V'alachta b'drachav. And Derech Hashem is, God explained to Avram, is doing tzedek u'mishpat, justice and righteousness. Keeping God's laws at the technical level, that's halacha. And obeying God, lishmo v'kolod, like we had at Brit Sinai. Remember, lishmo tishmo v'koli. What did God take upon Himself? That will be His Am Skula, like He told us at Har Sinai, to keep all of His laws. and put us in a leadership position above the nations for God's glory, for Tilah Shem Utiferet, to glorify God. And that will make us an Am Kadosh, remember? Tashem, our God, like he told us, Fatem Tulim, Amlechet Konim V'Goy Kadosh. So if we fulfill the mitzvah, what I'm getting at, the word Torah means an instruction booklet, but instruction booklet towards a goal. The goal is to become a Mamlechet Konim V'Goy Kadosh, to sanctify God. How do we do it? By setting up a nation whose laws are just and upright, with leadership, with laws that remind us of how we have to behave, laws for the marketplace, laws for judicial system, laws for the king. Remember here, the king doesn't appoint the judges. The judges are appointed by the judges, according to the Chumash. There's the educational leadership. There's the basically the king has to listen to the guidance of the shoftim. But that's going to be the end of the speech, and that explains why this whole set of laws is referred to as an instruction booklet. But it's the main book of Chumash. Now, if I take that again, if that's the speech, and all these laws in Sefer Devarim relate to the Ten Commandments beautifully, then if I go back to Sefer Devarim, Sefer Parshat Shavua, let's go back to Parshat Shavua. Where are we here? Shmot, chapter 24, right here. If I go back to how we began this year, after the Ten Commandments, and after they get scared, etc., God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, come up the mountain and be there. I'll give you the Luchot Even and the Torah and the Mitzvah. There's the Luchot Even I'm giving you, which I'm writing, got it? And the Torah and the Mitzvah, which is to teach them, to instruct them. That's the laws of Sefer Devarim. Okay. Moshe goes up the mountain. He comes down, and what happens? He goes up the mountain. The people see him in a ball of fire. Go in. He's there for 40 days. In the meantime, Chet HaEgel. And therefore, when Moshe comes down from Har Sinai, he should teach the laws from Devarim, but he can't because of the situation. 40 days he has to daven. Another 40 days he goes up to get the second luchot and God's attributes of mercy. We have a new covenant with God that's where God is more forgiving, which enables this relationship to continue. We have the symbol of the covenant, of the new covenant with God's attributes of mercy, being in the Mishkan. We have this portable mikdash, which will keep us connected to God until we're able to conquer Israel, to make us worthy. But then when is Moshe first going to teach these laws? The laws he got on the first 40 days, he couldn't teach them when he came down, when he broke the luchot. He couldn't teach them until after he got the second luchot. Let's see what happens when he comes down with the second luchot. That's in Parshat, Ramban brought this down, in Parshat Kitisa. I'll just have it on another source sheet here. This is when Moshe comes down with the second luchot, after he gets the Midot Rachamim. Vahi beredet Moshe mihar Sinai, shnei luchot haidut yad Moshe. The Moshe didn't know his face was shining. This is when Moshe comes down on Yom Kippur with the second luchot. That's Mari Cohen comes from this story here. Right? Aaron and Bnei Israel see that Moshe's face is shining and they're scared. Okay? Moshe calls to them, breaks the ice by Kadam Moshe, and Aaron and the Nisim come back to him and they break the ice. Now, afterwards, everyone comes to Moshe Rabbeinu. They're not afraid of him anymore. And what does Moshe do after Yom Kippur? And when he comes down with the second luchot, as they're building the Mishkan, what's Moshe command them? All the laws that God told him on Har Sinai in the first 40 days and the second 40 days. But Sefer Shemot doesn't tell us the laws. Sefer Shemot only tells us that Moshe received the laws and he taught the laws, but didn't say what the laws were. Am Yisrael heard the laws, and we'll see over and over again because these laws he counts repetition. The reader of Chumash doesn't find out about them until Moshe teaches them in the 40th year. And that's the first line of Sefer Devarim, according to Ibn Ezra and Ramban. Right? Remember the introductory line in Sefer Devarim? Let me open it up real fast. Sefer Devarim. Opening line of the book. What's Moshe say? The Devarim, remember? These laws of Sefer Devarim, right? What's coming up in this speech, in the main speech, are the Devarim, the laws and the rebuke, we'll see. the Moshe taught of Israel now in the 40th year in Ever Yarden, on the other side of the Jordan, in the 40th year. But Moshe had given this speech many times before. In the Midbar, he gave it in the Arava, he gave it Mosuf. And he gave this speech, especially when? On the 11-day journey from Chorev, which is Har Sinai, by way of Har Seir, until they got to Kadesh Barnea. In Kadesh Barnea, they sent the spies. What was Am Yisrael studying on that 11-day journey from Har Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, which should have been the journey to conquer the land of Israel? They studied laws of Sefer Dvarim because that's what they're going to have to keep when they come in the land. But everything got put off because of now Chetam Raglim, which is the next story in the speech. But now, now in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, a month before Moshe is about to die, Moshe is going to teach these laws one last time. So this is the final time Moshe teaches them, and he does it after we defeat Sichon and Og, which means God's ready to help us now. And in Ever Yarden, in Eretz Moav, in the 40th year, Moshe begins teaching these laws with the following speech about why it's been 40 years since we got there, and the story of the spies, and why it was put off, what was wrong with the first generation. But according to the opening line of Devarim, Moshe has given this speech numerous times before, and now this is the last time he gives the speech. And the last time he gives the speech, the laws are 40 years old, the rebuke is new. And that's why when you go through the speech, sometimes he'll have flashbacks to what's happened historically in the last 40 years, but the laws and the encouragement and the principles are all 40 years old. He got them on the first 40 days. And therefore, when Moshe went up, therefore the main book of law in Chumash is basically the laws of Sefer Dvarim. That, the main book of the laws of day-to-day life as of Jewish people. Those are laws in the main speech in Dvarim from chapters 5 to 26. That's what we read at Hakel. That's going to be Midi Har Sinai. They applied the 10 Commandments. And what all the Parshim were saying in the beginning, that the 10 Commandments include, are the principles that are going to be expounded upon by the laws later in Chumash, by the Torah and the Mitzvah, is right on the mark when you understand it's referring to Sefer Dvarim. So what I want to claim is, let's go back to the screen share. When Moshe went up, not this one, back to Devarim, here we go. When Moshe went up to, I'm going to go back here, back to Shemot 24. That's not Shemot 24, here we go. Shemot 24. When Moshe goes up, after Har Sinai, right, for the first 40 days, he gets Luchot Even and the Torah and the Mitzvah. Those are the laws of Sefer Dvarim. HaMitzvah is from Shema Tavai Mishmoah. The Torah are the laws from Mishpatim from chapters 12 to 26. And Moshe wrote the Luchot. God wrote the Luchot, and God gave Moshe the Torah and the Mitzvah to teach them. And again, Am Yisrael heard them over and over again. These laws are called Mishneh Torah because they need constant repetition. That's why we repeat them all the time. But the laws that need constant repetition are the laws of Devarim. And we fulfill that every day when we say Shema, which is the beginning and ending of the HaMitzvah section. And then, if I go back to, where's my source sheet again? If I go back to, here we are. There's a great, I'll show you the Chizkuni in a minute. But we saw the Parshanim. And, so every 7 years we read this at Hakel. And again, the Ramban that we saw before, when Mas'alei Ha'ara, he says, I'm going to give you Luchot Even, the Torah Mitzvah to teach them, okay? And he said, that's referring to what's happening in Shemot is referring to what happened in Mishneh Torah in Devarim. Also, Ramban says that this pasuk in Shemot is referring to what's happening in Devarim. He didn't do the whole analysis that we did with the word Torah referring to Mishpatim and the Mitzvah being the Mitzvah section. But if you that's the logical conclusion of what he's saying. If the story of Mishneh Torah is what's happening in Sefer Shemot, and that's what he's saying here, then I have a very good understanding of what the Torah and the Mitzvah are. And then basically it all comes together. And then, as far as how Chumash is put together, I'll show you the beautiful Chizkuni here, who says on the pasuk when Moshe comes down with the second Luchot, right, what does Moshe command them by Tzavim? Moshe commands them everything God taught him on Har Sinai. So what's Chizkuni saying? What's everything that God taught him on Har Sinai? All the commandments, all the commandments that Moshe received on the first 40 days and the second 40 days. Got to call the mitzvot. Let me get a little marker here. Annotate and spotlight, okay? All the mitzvot that God got that Moshe got in the first 40 days, laws and Dvarim, and the second 40 days, the Mishkan, and Midat Torah Chamim, etc. And all the mitzvot that Moshe got that were commanded to Israel were given to Moshe Rabbeinu from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, when we left Egypt, Parshat HaChodesh, etc., until the 20th Iyar, after they leave, after they build the Mishkan and they get the laws of Vayikra, and they're about to leave. Okay? In other words, Moshe received laws, some in Egypt, some in Har Sinai in the first 40 days, some in the second 40 days, some in Marah, some from the Mishkan. Moshe received lots of laws over the first year. But the Torah that we have was given to Moshe Megillah. What happened? The Shaya Moshe Shomea Mitzvot Mipia Kadosh Baruch Hu. This is the Chizkuni on chapter 34 in Shemot. When Moshe would hear the laws from God, he would write them down. Someone mentioned before, he'd have to memorize them. Here says he would write them down. Everyone had its own little Megillah, own little parchment. Moshe had a whole library of laws and stories. When it came time for Moshe to die in the 40th year, Sider Sefer Torah v'Kabal Parshiot Ad Hayom Hazeh. I call this, God told Moshe Rabbeinu, publish and perish. Take everything you wrote down, publish it in one big book or in five books. And how does Moshe organize the Torah? Right? Not in chronological order, not in topical order. When Moshe Rabbeinu puts Chumash together in the 40th year, according to Chizkuni, which according to Gemara and Gittin, of the Torah is given Megillah, the Torah that we have, the 5 books of Moses, are finalized in the 40th year, right before Moshe dies. He gives it to Shevet Levi to teach afterwards. That's going to be the Torah that Moshe gives Shevet Levi that goes next to the Aron. So one book of laws will be his speech from Devarim with the introduction and the final warnings. It'll be like, the book of how we became a nation and why God chose us will be Sefer Breshit. The book about how God put us into Egypt, took us out of Egypt, entered a covenant. We broke the covenant and God's attributes of mercy will be Sefer Shemot. How to use the Mishkan, Sefer Vayikra. What went wrong with the first generation and why it took 2 generations to go in, and how we have to learn from our mistakes, Sefer Bamidbar. Now, but as Moshe is telling in each book, he's taking law sections. Some of the laws he puts in Shemot, when appropriate. Some of the laws he puts in Vayikra were appropriate. Some laws he puts in Bamidbar, and the main set of laws he gives in Sefer Dvarim. But all these laws he received in Har Sinai. Now, if you put this all together, basically what happened, 1 second, clear drawings and unshare, stop share. Basically what happens, any law that Moshe got on Har Sinai that didn't fit into Breshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim becomes Torah Shabbat Peh. So Moshe goes up, or Halach Moshe Misinai. Moshe gets lots of laws on Har Sinai. Certain laws make it to Chumash, certain laws don't make it to Chumash for whatever reason. And that becomes Torah Shabbat Peh. But the main set of laws, as Chazal tell us, that Moshe receives on Har Sinai are in the first 40 days, and that covers pretty much everything. Later, during the 40 years, other things happen. He writes them down, and those become part of the other books. So the final form of Chumash, the Torah that we have, is put together in the 40th year, but the law sections and the core laws that make us God's people, they're going to be in on the first 40 days. Okay, I'll send the source sheets out. Yeah. Let me go to the chat. 1 second. Let me do this to everybody. Any questions in the meantime? I can't share from my computer. I have to put on the Google Drive. Okay, I'll send the source sheet to the Bat Shirut, and then she'll send it out to you. I'll send her an email and then she can share it with you.
When we say in Devarim that we are going to be a example to all the other nations, does that include all these laws of Mishpatim in terms of civil damages and everything, which has become the basis for the civil law system today?
Yeah, it includes the laws of Mishpatim as well. The laws of Mishpatim are so basic, they come right with the 10 Commandments. And they need those are urgent because we need them in the desert. The laws in Devarim are laws that only apply once we become to Israel.
So I was on a show recently where the guy said that we're not supposed to teach the laws of Mishpatim to the non-Jews, but this seems very clear that we're supposed to teach the laws.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we have to be the example. It's not our duty to tell other people what to do. We have to do what's right, and we have to be the model of good behavior. And what other nations think of us is critical. That's how we glorify God's name by acting in a way that sanctifies God, and being just and upright and being honest. Right? The goal of the Jewish people was not just to conquer the land of Israel. That's a vehicle so that we can become a nation that serves God and represents God properly, that sanctifies God in how we act in our day-to-day life. If the people in the land of Israel act in a way that is not just and upright, that's the biggest chilul Hashem that could possibly be.
We're doing such a
And
great
if
job.
we act that way, God will throw us out of the land. That's
Doing
what
such a
Chumash
great
is
job.
screaming. That's what all the Nevi'im interpret. You know, other people interpret it differently nowadays, but that's a different issue.
Got it.
And they claim to be Dati Leumi, but that's I don't want to get started. At all.
Local.
What?
How does dairy fit into this?
In my opinion, everything is happening. It's antithetical to everything Chumash is about.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, it's a disaster. And, you know, to claim the idea of what do you call it? Of the idea that the government, the Malchut, should make all the decisions, and there shouldn't be a court system. You can complain that the court system's unjust. That's something else.
Yeah.
But to say that the government shouldn't have a moral conscience, and people not appointed by government, what do you call it? What all the Nevi'im, what's Isaiah doing and what's Yirmiyahu doing?
Yeah.
They're telling the political system, you guys are corrupt. What you're doing is wrong, and they're not. The Nevi'im are not appointed by the Melech. They're independent of the Melech, and the whole education system is independent of the Melech. The 3-party system, in Chumash, even a 4-party system, is rooted in Chumash, especially in Devarim. There's a Melech who has to run the country, but he has to listen to the Navi, and he has to say for Torah. He's limited. We limit the limitation of government. It's core to Chumash, and being what do you call it? And being built in room levavo. Remember, government. If Parshat Melech tells you how to run a country, right? We have the Torah. What's the bottom line? Levilti room levavo. She doesn't become haughty. This is how the people are talking.
Who appoints the Nevi'im?
What? The Nevi'im are they're appointed. They're godly. Definitely not the king. That's for sure.
Sorry?
They're appointed by God. Now,
In the history, there were
yeah.
a lot of Nevi'im. There were universities for them.
Right. So God, that's why that Yirmiyahu is appointed by God. Yeshayahu is appointed by God. Remember? But they're people.
How the other guys who come forth, and there were Beit Nevi'im, like schools for Nevi'im.
Yeah, there's Nevi'im, court Nevi'im, appointed by the king, who just say what the king wants to hear. That's the story with Achab. He has 400 Nevi'im saying, go to war. And there's one real Nevi. And remember, they have stories like this all the time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Navi Hashem is someone appointed by God, sent by God, and the king has to recognize who's being sent by God. Now, there's a laws for Navi Sheker, that's something else.
That's the trick, the recognition of who is the real Nevi.
So there's a test for that, but basically, follow the Rambam, someone who's just and upright and wise and studies, it's
And who
yes, a chazaka.
who decides which guy is that?
The Nevi'im are basically what should be what someone immersed in Torah and study of Jewish law and Talmud, who's honest, just, and upright and knowledgeable, should have the ability. I always bring example of Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein was an example of that. Someone, he had the credentials to become a Navi. He wasn't a Navi, but if he said something, he's not coming from a political position. Now you could argue with his opinion, but someone immersed in Torah and understanding why Am Yisrael is chosen, he can, the job of the Navi is not to run the country. The job of the Navi is to guide the king, not just tell him what's kosher and what's not kosher. The job of the Navi is to give moral guidance, what to do in when to go to war, when not to go to war. What wars are just, what wars are not just. What?
How do you know who's the right Navi?
So again, the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim talks about that. In book 2, from chapter 32 to 48, from Lev to Moach. That's a gematria. It's easy.
It tells you how difficult it is to find
That's
something.
it, yeah. But no, a Navi only works when people want to listen to a Navi.
Yeah.
The biggest problems with the Navi Sheker are saying what people want to hear, not what they need to hear. The cry of Yirmiyahu and Yecheskel is that the Navim, the false Navim, who are claimed to be God's Navim, they're saying what people want to hear, not what they need to hear. People want to hear a Masabion here, God's going to punish your enemies, God's going to kill them. Just come and pray to God and God will save you from your enemies. And whenever a Navi says you have to build a just society, they want to kill the guy. They want a God working for them. They want a God of war. They want a guy of social justice. Just read Yirmiyahu and Yeshayahu is screaming that. And Micha and Hosea and Amos, that's what they're screaming. And that's why we lost the first temple.
But that's exactly something we know afterwards. Who went to the Beit Nevi'im to find out what to do? Pull them up out of the dead.
Oh, Shaul.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what he was torn what to do now because he's realizing at the end of his life he should have listened to Navi a long time ago. I mean, he thought that Navi was an old man. He didn't accept what Shmuel said until the day before he died. Then he saw what he sees in that vision. It's like a nightmare before the last battle. His whole life comes back to him to haunt him. Okay. All right. Anyway, everyone have a good week and hopefully a better week than last week. Okay, we'll take a short break to 10:40. Okay, bye-bye.